particularly during this season, however you vote, you are welcome here. I mean that. However you vote, you are welcome. I welcome those who are joining our service virtually, whether you're streaming right now or catching up with us later. We're so glad you could join us. And why I look there is because that's our camera, and that's how they're joining us in worship as we are live streaming our services, which is so exciting. They're actually, I'm hearing people, not just in the United States, not just in Maryland, but even in different countries who are tuning into our services. If you are new to Cedar Lane, we have a small gift for you. So if you're new, can I get you to raise your hand for a second so that we can get that gift to you? We are so glad that you have all chosen to join us this morning for worship. All are invited to linger after the service to enjoy coffee and conversation. If you choose to use a yellow mug, our members and friends will be sure to greet you. And if you just need somebody to talk with today and you choose to use a yellow mug, I sure hope our members and friends will be sure to greet you. Before we move into our worship time, I'd like to call your attention to a few elements in our news insert, including, I don't have it. There it is. Okay. Y'all have one of these in your orders of celebration, right? This is our upcoming Diwali celebration. This Saturday, refreshments at 6, program at 7. It is the first in a series of worship experiences called the Spirit Experience, trying to bring in some joyful, spirited, multicultural worship. And since I'm guessing you will all be there, it's going to be a great time, go ahead and take this home, invite somebody else, and give them the flyer so that they can come too. This morning, we welcome Reverend Lynn Strauss to our worship. She serves our congregation in Rockville and has been serving there for 12 years. And she is also here as Reverend Abi is not with us. He's in Arizona hosting a group of Cedar Laners and some UUs from other congregations who are going on a experiential immersion trip to the border. And last, our Share the Plate this morning is with Court Watch Montgomery, and Bonnie is here to share a little bit more about that.
I'm Bonnie Beavers, a 20-year Cedar Laner and former board chair, and a Court Watch Montgomery volunteer. And my daughter, Juliet Anderson, is here with me. She grew up in this church, and she is a Court Watch administrative assistant.
Over 100,000 Montgomery County residents are likely to experience domestic violence in their lifetime. 3,000 people come to our courts seeking protection from domestic violence every year. Court Watch was founded in 2010 by Lori Duker, then a victim's advocate at the Family Justice Center, as a systemic approach to domestic violence. Our 75 volunteers monitor over 1,000 domestic violence cases every year, collecting data, discovering where the system fails domestic violence victims, and working with county officials to enact life-saving reforms. Already, Court Watch has changed the way victims are treated in courts, championing such policies as staggered exits, in which the abuser is held for 15 minutes after a court hearing so the victim can leave safely. We are also actively working with Maryland courts and law enforcement to reduce abusers' access to guns, which increases the risk of homicide by 500%.
One of our most important initiatives now is to address the lack of supervised visitation and exchange centers, a loophole in protective orders that has already cost the lives of community members. Montgomery County needs a network of facilities where children of families experiencing violence can be transferred safely for visits and where visits can be monitored by trained supervisors when needed. This is urgent and it is achievable.
Court Watch is creating the future of domestic violence prevention here in Montgomery County, and we are setting a powerful example for our entire nation. Please lend your support to save lives, protect victims and their children from further abuse, and to secure a safer environment for everyone. We'd love to see you visit us at our table in the lounge to send a postcard to County Executive Ike Leggett requesting funding for safe visitation centers and to learn more about volunteer opportunities. This really is a critical point in our campaign, and we need your help. Thank you so much on behalf of Court Watch Montgomery.
Thank you.
And I now invite you to turn and greet your immediate neighbors. Our varied paths through our weeks, as we come together bringing our stories, bringing our burdens, bringing our joys, we come together to make this time sacred. Come, let us worship together.
Thank you, children and children's director. Thank you. That was lovely. Our sermon theme, our topic for the morning is hope. And so I was drawn to offer our opening words from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who really never gave up hope and who taught us again and again about the network of mutuality and how we are all connected, and therein lies our hope. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. There are some things in our social system to which all of us ought to be maladjusted. Hatred and bitterness can never cure the disease of fear. Only love can do that. We must evolve for all human conflict a method which rejects revenge, aggression, and retaliation. The foundation of such a method is love. Before it is too late, we must narrow the gaping chasm between our proclamations of peace and our lowly deeds which precipitate and perpetuate war. One day, we must come to see that peace is not merely a distant goal that we seek, but a means by which we arrive at that goal. We must pursue peaceful ends through peaceful means. We shall then hew out of the mountain of despair a stone of hope.
As Dave Hover comes forward to kindle our chalice, symbol of our shared faith, please rise in body or in spirit to read the chalice lighting words printed in your order of celebration. We kindle our flaming chalice to illuminate the world we seek. In the search for truth, may we be just. In the quest for justice, may we be loving. And in loving, may we find and live peace. Please remain standing. Let us sing together, Be Thou My Vision, number 20 in the hymnal.
Amen.
We gather in this sacred space of community to find the spiritual, emotional, and even the physical strength to face the many challenges of our lives. In this time of reflection, we lift up those in our community who are living through significant passages, the small and the extraordinary milestones of life. We pause to be present to our spiritual companions and to the concerns of our own hearts. May all who gather here be held in the embrace of this community of care. We continue to hold in our hearts all those lives that have been lost, the injured, those who have been displaced by violence, in particular by the ongoing war in the Middle East, and also in Haiti, where people are struggling to remake their lives. We note the passing of Albert Will Belay, former husband of Glennis Belay, who died October 20th in Savannah, Georgia. There will be a worship service in Savannah late in the month, and we hope also to have a memorial service here at Cedar Lane in the new year. May these friends of ours and our companions in the world, and all that lives unspoken in our hearts, be held in the embrace of prayer and in the peace that the stillness of silence brings.
For our time of prayer this morning, with this being Domestic Violence Awareness Month, I share this poem written by Diana Rasmussen. I come to you today. I'm sitting in this room looking for answers and a life made new. Do I tell you what happens when I make it home? I'm a prisoner of war behind his locked door. Can you give me a prayer? Can you give me a promise, something to hold on to in the middle of chaos? You see Mr. Jekyll, all smiles and lies, but he twists what you say to get his own way. Starting tonight, I know the accusations start when I run and hide because to me, he's Mr. Hyde. Can you give me a prayer? Can you give me a promise, something to hold on to in the middle of chaos? Renew my mind. Restore my hope. Show me your grace to rebuild this broken place. Prayers and promises of what will someday be. God, help me to see things can change someday. During our time of silence, I invite those grieving a loss or commemorating the anniversary of a loss to rise in body or in spirit until our music begins.
As we focus this morning on hope, I offer this poem by Unitarian Universalist minister Victoria Safford, who serves our congregation in White Bear, Minnesota. She writes, "The Gates of Hope. Our mission is to plant ourselves at the gates of hope, not the prudent gates of optimism, which are somewhat narrower, not the stalwart, boring gates of common sense, nor the strident gates of self-righteousness, which creak on shrill and angry hinges. People cannot hear us there, nor can they pass through. Nor the cheerful, flimsy garden gate of everything's going to be all right, but a different, sometimes lonely place, the place of truth-telling about your own soul, first of all, and its condition, the place of resistance and defiance, the piece of ground from which you see the world, both as it is and as it could be, as it will be, the place from which you glimpse not only struggle, but the joy of struggle. And we stand there, beckoning and calling, telling people what we are seeing and asking people what they see."
If we want hope to survive in this world today, then every day we've got to pray on, pray on. If we want hope to survive in this world today, then every day we've got to pray on.
If we want hope to survive in this world today, then every day we've got to pray on, pray on. If we want hope to survive in this world today, then every day we've got to pray on. If we want hope to survive in this world today, we've got to walk on every day. We've got to walk on, walk on. We've got to walk on, survive. We've got to work on today. We've got to every day. We've got to walk on, walk on. We've got to work on, survive. We've got to work on today. We've got to every day. We've got to work on, work on. We've got to work on, survive. Peace in the world. We've got to work on, work on, work on. Move on, survive. We've got to peace in the world. We've got to every day. We've got to move on, move on. We've got to move on, survive. We've got to move on the world. We've got to every day. We've got to move on, move on. We've got to march on, survive. We've got to march on.
Thank you, choir. Thank you, Henry. It is such a pleasure to be here this morning, and it's wonderful to move around our wonderful congregations in the Beltway. Some of you know I have been at the Rockville congregation for 11 and a half years, but before that I was at the River Road congregation for 5 years. And so everywhere I go, I run into people that either know me or I know them. And so this morning I ran into a woman, and she reminded me that in 2002, I officiated at the marriage of her and her husband, and she's a member here. And then later, a young woman came up to me and said, "Are you Maria's mother?" And that's my oldest daughter, and they were students together at Haverford. And then someone else in the choir I spoke to, and his son is at St. Mary's, where my son also went to school. And then I saw Archine come running in from the parking lot. And I said, "Archine, I just never know where I'm going to run into you, but I know I will." It's especially great for me to be here today because last Sunday at the Rockville congregation, we celebrated our 60th anniversary as a congregation. And some of you might know, yes, some of you might know that the Rockville congregation was birthed out of this congregation in 1956 because the Sunday school program, the RE program here, was so overfull with children that they had to start a whole nother church just to accommodate all the children at that time. And so this congregation sponsored, and people left this congregation in a radical act, leaving their beloved home here to start a new home. And so this morning I'm going to be speaking a little bit about radical acts. A radical act is something that you do in the context of whatever it is you want to change. So in that case, in the context of religious community, they needed to grow. And so the radical act was to start and seed a new congregation. There are many different kinds of radical acts, and it takes courage, moral courage, to do something to change the direction of something that you know isn't going in the right way or in the way that it could with the most possibility. For me, I was also listening to the words of the first choir piece about belief in God, and I was thinking of all the different images of God that people, as they were singing, must have been holding in their heads about the kind of God that is most meaningful to them. And I was reminded that for me, God is religious community. I can't imagine my life without religious community. The greatest privilege of my life has been to find my place within religious community. I grew up in a small activist Methodist congregation in a neighborhood in Chicago, and it was really formative for my life because it was within the embrace of that congregation that I was encouraged to go to college, which no one in my family had ever done. And my parents, they just weren't thinking that way, and neither was I. But in my church, I was seen as a leader and as a person who had possibilities beyond what my family might have thought about. And so with the support of that community, I became a teacher. And then years later, I went to seminary in Chicago as well. And I was well into my 40s. So radical change and changing of direction takes time. It doesn't happen overnight. And so we are all here this morning because you have made some kind of a change in your life, some kind of radical step. Can you think back for a moment, just take a moment to think of what's a radical step you've taken in your life? Earlier, I gave the example of changing from having a daily bagel for my breakfast to having cinnamon raisin toast. So in the context of breakfast, it seemed like a radical step. And so there's no value or judgment about what these steps are. They can seem quite minor, but they can also lead you into places which you just have no idea where you might end up as a result of that one step. We're standing in religious community under the gates of hope that our poet wrote about. And as I stand here almost every Sunday of my life, in that place between the secular world and the sacred, between the sins and suffering of the world and the promise of what is possible, I have come to believe that I and we have a part to play in making the world a better place. You know, everyone doesn't hold that belief, but religious communities do. I wonder who here this morning, either in this sanctuary or in classrooms downstairs or in the kitchen making coffee or sitting behind a social justice table in the fellowship hall, as I know they're doing in Rockville right now. I wonder who here this morning is finding hope, finding in this religious community of soul and safe space a new possibility for their lives. I want you to know how much the world still needs religious community. Oh yes, the shape of it might change. We might stream it. We might tweet it. We might do all new forms of religious community. But religious community is still very much needed in the world today. This morning, I want to nurture in your souls a deep pride in our Unitarian Universalist faith and in a faith of all these wonderful congregations that we are in relationship to around the Beltway. All of the ministers, former ministers, music directors, RE directors, pianists, who have really given their lives to keep Unitarian Universalism strong in our region. We are needed because, as writer Paul Loeb writes in his book, the impossible will take a little while. The impossible will take a little while, and that's why radical religion is needed. The arc of radical religion is a long arc, and we are a part of it. When Jesus upset the tables of the money changers in the temple, it was a radical act. When he invited outcasts and strangers and those of different tribes to sit at the welcome table, it was a radical act. When Paul of Tarsus encouraged shared leadership between men and women within the first century house churches, it was a radical act. When in 1517 Martin Luther left his 95 Theses nailed to the door of the church in Wittenberg, attacking the corrupt practices of the Catholic Church, it was indeed a radical act. When Michael Servetus continued to challenge the error of the Trinity in 1553, for which he was burned at the stake in Geneva, his was a radical act. Servetus is honored as the first Unitarian martyr, and thus we Unitarian Universalists are proud inheritors of the arc of radical religion. For what would we give our lives? Belonging to the liberal religious tradition, we value doubt and questions. We are discontented with empty ritual and unexamined creeds. Our faith, ignited in the flames of religious freedom, rests on the foundation of direct human experience. And so I begin this morning by telling you a little bit of my story. And when you greet one another, you tell a little bit of your story, because the foundation of our faith is in our personal experience of the sacred and of the secular. Sometimes people give their lives because of the questions they ask. Sometimes they die inside because of the questions they fail to ask. When in 1836, Unitarian minister Ralph Waldo Emerson resigned his pulpit at Second Church in Boston, he was no longer comfortable offering the rite of communion. It was a radical act to walk away from the church he served. To save his integrity, he had to leave his parish ministry. For an action to be radical, it must relate to the fundamental nature of what is being challenged. The act itself advocates reform of a traditional practice. A radical act is a turning away from what has gone before and a turning toward a new way. If communion has lost its symbolic power, if separate but equal abandons foundational principles, if arming the nation's citizens compromises the general welfare, then radical change is needed. Jesus advocated radical hospitality, turning away from separating people into categories according to tribe and the traditional structures of power, priests, and so on, and turned instead toward inclusion and a fellowship of equals. Servetus advocated radical freedom of thought and belief, turning away from narrow interpretations of God and Jesus and toward a wider and freer interpretation of Scripture. Emerson advocated radical acceptance of individual religious experience, turning away from a closed and unchanging ritual to an ever new and open experience of revelation. These are just a sampling of the radical acts that have defined our faith over the centuries. Ours is a faith always open to the new and always standing under the gates of hope. It is this openness, this valuing of change and questioning, it is this arc of radical challenge to orthodoxy that makes liberal faith unique. I'm speaking this morning about radical because I have come to feel that liberal is a little bit too comfortable a word, a little bit too comfortable a place to stop. We used to talk much more in the 60s about radical things, and I'm trying to get us back in that direction because liberal has become a very comfortable kind of middle of the road. You know, we've been successful with liberal, so now we have to get back to radical. Our faith demands that we remain relevant, that we live fully in the context of today, that we minister to today's suffering, narrowness, inequality, domestic violence, racism, sexism, homophobism. Our faith demands that we transform the old ways of yesterday and today into the new ways of tomorrow. Even though we don't know what they are, we can't see the future, but we can create it. If we are pledged and covenanted to living into the arc of radical religion in our time, then we must look squarely at the world that lies broken at our feet. We must, in every service, in every gathering, name the suffering, think and hold in our hearts the stories of the oppressed peoples, and we must also lift up hope. We do and can continue to do both. We must become allies and witnesses to the radical moral agenda of our time, the moral agenda of racial inclusion, of gender justice, of gun control legislation, the moral agenda of protecting our children, quality education, food, and clean water, as the children told us. If we are called to repair the broken places, we must see and stand in the breach between what is and what can be. We must hold up the gates of hope, not the gates that say everything will be all right, but the gates that name the truth. It is an ancient challenge, made new in each generation, laid out in the words of the prophet Isaiah. Is not this the fast that I choose, to loose the bonds of wickedness, undo the thongs of the yoke, to let the oppressed go free, and to break every yoke? Is it not to share your bread with the hungry and bring the homeless poor into your home? When you see the naked, to cover him and not to hide yourself from him? Then shall your light break forth like the dawn, and your healing shall spring up quickly. You know through your own life experience, when you reach out a hand to others, your heart is also healed. The ancient scripture tells us that our own healing, as Martin Luther King tells us as well in the network of mutuality, our healing is intimately tied to radical acts of mercy and kindness. Only when we act as repairers of the breach, only then will we be healed, for everyone is connected. Injustice anywhere is wounding to us all. The arc of radical religion is not dead, it is not finished, it is not complete, but it may pass us by if we do not pay close attention and step into the breach wherever we see it, wherever we can, whatever gifts we have to offer. There is much good news. In New York City last month, the Forest Church Award for Humanitarian Service honored the co-founders of Black Lives Matter. This award was created in remembrance of Unitarian Universalist minister Reverend Forrest Church, who served our All Souls New York congregation for over 30 years. UUA President Peter Morales presented the award to Alicia Garza, Patrice Cullors, and Opal Tometi in recognition of Black Lives Matter's great influence in reawakening public consciousness of the injustices facing people of color domestically as well as internationally, and in its role in activating support for racial justice. The arc of radical religion also lives on in the work of Reverend Dr. William Barber III. I hope some of you have read his book or listened to he gave an address at General Assembly this past June. So if you go to the UUA website, you can find that address of Reverend Barber. He's a fabulous speaker and a wonderful person. And he is the leader of the Moral Monday movement. And I know Abi has participated in some of the actions around Moral Monday. And so I'm sure he can tell you more about it if he hasn't already. And it's a wonderful book. I'm suggesting in Rockville that we read and discuss Reverend Barber's book together. It's called The Third Reconstruction. Reverend Barber's an advocate of what he calls fusion politics, which also is nothing new, but it's the idea that there is no hierarchy of oppression, that all oppressions are interrelated, whether it's poverty, domestic violence, racism, that all of these things are connected. The first Reconstruction, according to Barber, came after the Civil War. The second followed the Civil Rights Movement. And now with Black Lives Matter and so many others, Reverend Barber embodies hope and shares stories of hope wherever he goes. The Moral Monday agenda arose in the state of North Carolina, a state that has undergone extreme social and political change over the past decade. And North Carolina is one of those broken places, in many places, where change has brought about increased oppression and the need for more healing. One irony of justice work is that those who sacrifice the most actually end up feeling the most hopeful. If you've been deeply engaged in justice movements, you will discover and meet there people who have sacrificed the most and people who have the most hope. In Reverend Barber's words, as I've traveled to share North Carolina's story, I've seen how a Reconstruction framework can help America see our struggles in a new light. Everywhere I have gone, from deep in the heart of Dixie to Wisconsin, I've heard a longing for a moral movement that plows deep into our souls and recognizes that the attacks we face today, for anyone who leads a moral movement or a radical action, will be attacked. They will get hate mail, they will get death threats, and he has suffered through all of that. Because he takes that as evidence that they're doing the right work, that they're challenging the status quo sufficiently. They're not a sign of weakness, but they're a sign of the fear of those who are the governing elites or those who are among those longing still for the American dream. Reverend Barber insists that change is bound to come, and he names the sources of his hope. We've had the opportunity, he says, to drink from the tributaries that run toward the great stream of justice throughout America. And he's not talking here about the kind of history that I was telling you about. He's talking about current streams of justice. Hands Up, Don't Shoot, I Can't Breathe, Black Lives Matter, the fast food workers rise up, minimum wage movements, the voting rights movements, people over money, the women's rights and end rape culture movements, LGBTQ equality movements, global movements to address climate change, immigrants' rights, not one more movements. There are so many great movements happening right now. So much energy for change, for radical change. So much truth-telling. Within the framework of a third reconstruction, he says, we see how all of our movements are flowing together, recognizing that our intersectionality creates the opportunity to redirect America. If you go to a Moral Monday rally, as Abi and I did, and a group of UU ministers did, you will be there for quite a while, because part of their approach and their moral high ground is to allow the people who have suffered the most to speak at the rallies. So the rallies have kind of the usual voices, sort of like mine, and then they have the voices of the people. And it means so much, like we heard at the rally in DC from mothers who had lost their sons to police violence. We heard from people fighting on the front lines for fair wages. We heard from people whose neighborhoods have been dump sites for toxic waste. It takes a village to redirect America. It takes patience, strategies, negotiation, trial and error, one step forward, two steps back. It takes the sacrifices of many to show up, to give peace a chance, to keep moving forward, to go to jail, to bail people out. Sometimes it takes the ultimate sacrifice of giving your life for what you believe is just. Radical religion takes moral courage. And it does take patience. The Moral Monday movement started 10 years ago. It's not an overnight success. It takes coalitions of the faithful and the hopeful. It reminds me of the civil rights movement and all the coalitions that we needed then to keep moving forward. We needed the Quakers, the Black Panthers, the NAACP, the liberal churches, the leadership of Dr. King and others, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. We needed Pete Seeger and the students and people of Montgomery, Alabama. We needed the Vietnam vets against the war, the Negro spirituals, all those who spend a night in jail. We needed the Highlander Center in Tennessee, where Rosa Parks learned the strategies of grassroots organizing. We needed Unitarian Universalist minister James Reeb and Viola Ruzzo, and the young black men like Emmett Till, who gave their lives marching on the road to freedom. Radical religion requires moral courage. Radical change doesn't happen overnight, but the seeds are germinating even today. Adrienne Rich has a line of poetry that repeats in my head and resonates in my heart from her poem, Transcendental Etude. She writes, "A lifetime is too narrow to understand it all. We take on everything at once before we've even begun to read or mark time. We're forced to begin in the midst of the hardest movement, the one already sounding as we are born. And so we begin in the midst of the movement, the history of radical religion. We begin in the midst of the radical acts that precede us, and it is a noble heritage to redirect America, to act with moral courage. It is our calling as a people of faith. We must remember who we are and where we come from. And in the difficult weeks and months ahead following this election, whatever may happen, moral courage and moral leadership will be needed. There are many resources to strengthen our moral courage. Last month, I reread Dr. Martin Luther King's letter from the Birmingham jail, dated April 1963. I recommend, if you haven't read it, or reread it like I did. It begins, "My dear fellow clergymen, it is written in large part to what King called the white moderate clergy," or he could have said liberal, "and it's a call to repentance. King is shocked because the white moderate clergy have just asked him to be patient, to slow down, to not rock the boat or cause any more disturbance." It's an angry letter that Dr. King wrote, a letter of disappointment in his clergy brothers. It's still relevant in the context of today's racial violence, inequalities, fear and anger, and the terrible consequences of poverty in 2016. I invite you to read Reverend Barber's book as well as Dr. King's letter. We need to understand the strategies of a moral agenda. Reverend Barber calls rebuilding the broken places for him an experience of the gospel life. The foundation of his faith is the gospel. What is the foundation of your faith? What is your core moral value? How will you know when you are living according to your core values? You will know because you will feel healing in your soul. I invite you to join in the racial justice work in Montgomery County. There are many opportunities to get engaged. Perhaps then you will experience some form of the gospel life, and you will be helping to repair the world as you heal your soul. Some say religious institutions in America are in fatal decline. I disagree, not just because one of my daughters just graduated from seminary, but because there is still so much hope and so much need and so much that we gain from religious community. Am I the only one that can imagine life without Sunday congregating and worship? Where else will we be welcomed each week with a spirit of homecoming? Where else will we find the beauty and calm of a beautiful sanctuary? Where else can we talk to a child and an elder? Where else can we sing and leave with a song in our heart? Where else can we learn courage and be supported when we fail? Let this be our place of truth-telling, this piece of ground from which we see the world both as it is and as it will be. Let this be our place of joy in the struggle. And may we stand beckoning and calling, telling people what we are seeing and asking them what they see. I encourage you, take pride in our liberal faith tradition. Honor the sacrifices of those who have gone before. Bring your longing for justice here. Bring your soul in need of healing. Come into this safe space and find hope here, and take it with you into the world. So may it be. Amen.
As our ushers come forward to receive this morning's offering, all may participate in the life of the congregation with the gifts of their minds and their hearts, their skills and their time, their wisdom and their vulnerability, and the gifts of their livelihood and of their commitment. Whether on Sundays at this time, or whether by electronic means or gifts in our plate, we offer of ourselves to make community happen. The offering to sustain the mission and ministry of Cedar Lane and the work of Court Watch Montgomery, serving those families affected by domestic abuse here in Montgomery County, will now be given and gratefully received. Thank you for your generosity.
gifts that we have received and for the gifts that we are. We give thanks for the spirit of generosity and the courage and compassion that may be made manifest by these gestures of faith. Please rise now in body and word and spirit. And let's sing Guide My Feet, number 348 in the hymnal.
Guide my feet while I run this race. Guide my feet while I run this race. Guide my feet while I run this race. For I don't want to run this race in vain. Hold my hand. Hold my hand while I run this race. Hold my hand while I run this race. Hold my hand while I run this race. For I don't want to run this race in vain. Come on, put those books down. Stand by me. Stand by me. While I run this race. Stand by me. Stand by me. While I run this race. Stand by me. While I run this race. For I don't want to run this race in vain. Search my heart, search my heart, while I run this race. Search my heart, search my heart, while I run this race. Search my heart, while I run this race. For I don't want to run this race in vain.
Let us go forward into the world, living lives of moral courage. Let us go in gratitude for all of the radical acts that are represented here this morning. As you go out to coffee, tell each other a little something about radical acts you have taken in your life. Let us go and build peace and hope in the world. So may it be.